Okay. Friends, welcome to this lecture series on technology, society, and politics. Today's lecture is titled Techno Society. The stories, technology theories tell us about our future. So, enormous neologisms are in use to refer the social situations in which machines become a part of our life. So many vocabularies are being used to refer to the situation in which machines become an intimate part of our life. Machines invade our life. So man and technology go together. So how the situation is looking like. So many vocabularies are in use. I may say neologisms. So we know that the nature of emerging societies due to the invention of Watt engine, James Watt engine, aeroplane, Wright brothers, railway locomotives, automobiles, assembly lines of Henry Ford, electricity, or spinning wheel, a broadly mechanization of activities. We have so many literature and theoretical propositions about the society which was created by these kinds of inventions. I say Watt engine or aeroplane or railway locomotives or electricity. So with the invention of all these technologies, our society has changed. And what is the nature of our society because of these kinds of technology inventions were inquired by so many writers. So in this lecture, I am not going to reproduce all that these philosophers have said about technology. Rather, I am addressing a different issue. That, friends, we know that major technological changes were also associated with socio-economic and cultural changes in the 18th and 19th century. That all these technological inventions were also associated with social changes, economic changes, cultural changes in the 18th and 19th century. And we call this mechanization so that human labor can be taken away from engaging with activities. Now we have seen that human brain is also taken away from activities, and its place we are incorporating artificial intelligence kind of things, which we have discussed in the last lecture. Previously, the machine age, we have so many vocabularies to refer that situation, but we have no very good vocabularies to refer the situation which we are going to witness due to the invention of artificial brain. When machines attain intelligence, what is going to be our social situation? So to refer this situation, there is no very good vocabularies, friends. For example, in one of my previous lectures, I have given you some references. However, there were some attempts to refer to the situation in which what will be the nature of our society once machines become so advanced. One important writer you can refer is certainly a German British sociologist, Ralph Dahrendorf, he was saying that once machines advanced at a high scale, once machines take over all our social activities, we can say that we are living in a post-capitalist society. He uses the vocabulary post-capitalist society. That when machines come to our life, when machines come to our dining hall, when machines come to our kitchen, when machines come to our bedroom, you can say that, we have entered into a new stage in social world, in social life, which we can say post-capitalist society. So the terminology post-capitalist society is associated with German British sociologist Ralph Dahrendorf. And another writer of interest, he was an English-born American economist, Kenneth Boulding. He says that with the advance of technology, with the advance of machines, our world has entered into a post-civilized era. Look at the vocabulary he has used. Post-civilized era. Now we are living in a post-civilized era. That our civilization has ended. Now a new civilization has born. We can say that it is post-civilization era. Or a German-born Israeli American sociologist named Amita Etzioni. Amita Etzioni says, we are living in an era called post-modern era. This is a word he used to refer this situation, that technology or machines have advanced that stage in which there is no need for man at all. Many of our activities, human activities, are taken over by machines. So to understand this situation, we can look at this from the perspective of post-modern era. This is an interesting vocabulary he has coined. Or there is another an American professor who taught at Harvard University but specialized in British politics. His name was Samuel H. Beer. He was saying that now we are living in a post-collectivist age. He has to say something very different. Post-collectivist stage. That was his theory about a social life in which machines are so much advanced. Post-collectivist age. Samuel H. Beer. But at the same time, an Israeli sociologist, Essen Eisendat, says, now we are living in post-traditional society. That was the word he used to refer to our new situation. But an interesting vocabulary was used by Roderick Siedenberg. Roderick Siedenberg says, from prehistoric time, we developed tools, and tool making culture continued even after we started writing history, and we have moved even beyond. So from prehistory, we started making tools, but there were no history to mankind. Then from the Hellenic era onwards, we started writing history. Now we are moving to another stage. And he says that this is post-history stage, post-historic era. post-historic era. That was the word he used. So many vocabularies are in use, but we are not sure whether these vocabularies clearly tell you our new situation in which machines are so advanced. But a best way to look at this is certainly Daniel Bell. Daniel Bell. Daniel Bell has written a book and beautifully narrated our new situation. And his book was The Coming of Post-Industrial Society. The Coming of Post-Industrial Society. Ever since, the word post-industrial society was associated with Daniel Bell. Daniel Bell is basically an American sociologist. He was saying that we are living in a post-industrial society. And what is a post-industrial society? He says, we can divide industrial civilization into three parts. Industrial civilization into three parts. That our present day civilizations are all industrial civilizations. We are all living in industrial civilization because machines are so important to us, or technology are so important to us. So such a society we can divide into three parts. One is social structures, that religion, cultural institutions, family, etc. A second layer of this industrial civilization is political structure. He calls it polity. So we also have state, bureaucracy, and other kinds of formal institutions which implement laws. And we have a third institution in industrial civilization that is called culture. So we have culture, one layer, polity, another layer, social structure, a third layer. And he says, among these layers, what is more important is the social structure. Because changes are taking place not in the culture, not in the polity. When machines have advanced so much, these changes are not taking place in the institution of state nor in the institution of culture, but in the institution of social structure. He was saying, social structure is made up of or consists of economy, technology, and occupational system. Social structure is composed of three important layers: economy, technology, and occupational system. And he says, post-industrial society are concentrated in social structure, not in polity, not in culture. He says, our present-day society is a knowledge society. Post-industrial society is knowledge society. Friends, in the past, you take the case of your parents or grandparents, your parents or grandparents or their parents, great-pa. How they earned a living? They earned a living by manual labor. They had to use their muscles, their labor power to make an earning, to bring food to you, to build a house, to give you education. But friends, now that scenario changed. We are no more using labor power, but we are using another power. What is that? Knowledge. In the days ahead, if you want to live in society, you need to have knowledge. So because knowledge displaced labor power. Knowledge displaces labor power. So post-industrial society is that society where knowledge is more important than trained labor power. So knowledge is wealth. Friends, Britain became an empire. How? Because oil was the source of 20th century wealth. In 20th century, Americans became powerful. Britain became powerful. Why? Because oil, fossil fuel, was an important source of wealth. In the 18th century and 19th century, we know machineries were part of industrial civilization. And those countries which developed machines became very powerful. Look, take the case of Britain or Germany or Japan or America or France. They became wealthy societies because they had a command over machineries. But in 20th century, the thing became different because automobiles became very popular, and those countries who possess enormous fossil fuel became very powerful. And friends, in 21st century, only those countries which possess enormous knowledge will become wealthy. Those societies, those people who possess enormous knowledge will become wealthy. So wealth creation is dependent upon how much knowledgeable you are. So such a society you can call post-industrial society. This is an idea by Daniel Bell in his book The Coming In of Post-Industrial Society. Then you can see that a Massachusetts Institute of Technology professor, I have told about him in one of my previous lecture, Eric Bjornson and Andrew McAfee. They have referred to our new situation as the second machine age. The second machine age. That was their book, a very interesting book. You can download it from Google. That is available for free download. In their book, The Second Machine Age, Eric Bjornson and Andrew McAfee says that machines have advanced in such a stage in which it takes over our brain. Before that, we had a first machine age during industrial civilization. During the industrial civilization, machineries replaced labor power. That is why I have told you Luddite movement took place. They destroyed machines, spinning wheel, and other machineries which are used in manufacturing areas. But second machine age is different. Why? In the second machine age, we are not using machineries for production, but we are using machines for thinking power. That's why he referred to our new situation as a second machine age. But friends, this idea is not that popular, academically that not popular, but the idea of Daniel Bell is very popular, that post-industrial society. Or another very interesting vocabulary was used by Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab, I have already presented a lecture on that. The fourth industrial civilization or the fourth industrial revolution. Then he was saying that in his book was titled The Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution. In this book, Klaus Schwab was saying that machines are not only about connection and smartness. In the days to come, machines are not only about connection and smartness. It is also about scope. It's also about its scope. He was saying gene sequencing, nanotechnology, quantum computing, and the fusion of all these technologies will bring about fundamental changes in the biological domain of the world or of the planet Earth. What is going to happen? That gene sequencing, nanotechnology, quantum computing, renewable energy, technologies, and the fusion of all these technologies will bring about not only change in the physical domain of the planet Earth, not only in the physical domain of the planet Earth, but in the biological domain. So far, we are not able to control the biological domain. We are able to control the physical domain. We can change the nature or the shape of matter from one form to another form. We got a mastery over that technology. We are able to change matter from one form to another form, but we are not able to change biological existence from one form to another form. And Klaus Schwab is saying that we are able to change now biological existence from one form to another, which he refer as fourth industrial revolution. That was his idea. Then another very interesting, that is also not that popular, like the idea of Daniel Bell. But one interesting argument was proposed by Max Tegmark. He used a neologism called Life 3.0. Life 3.0. That's a very interesting book. I have downloaded that book from Google and referred for this lecture. And he says human or the world or evolution took three phases. Evolution took three phases. One is life 1.0. Second is life 2.0. Third is life 3.0. What is life 1.0? That is biological stage. That is, the world evolved biologically. 1 billion years ago, the world evolved biologically. That all the entities in the world biologically evolved. Okay. That the world evolved hardware and software of the world. You should not think that computer hardware and software, the hardware of the world and software of the world evolved biologically. Second is life 2.0. That is cultural stage. That is, the hardware of the world and software of the world designed much of its software its own. The hardware of the world, software of the world evolved much of its software by its own, on its own. That's called cultural stage. And there is a third stage, he says. Tegmark says, this is called life 3.0. Now we are living in life 3.0. That is technological stage. That is, we are designing ourselves. The planet is designing ourselves. Or the hardware of the world is designing itself. Clear? So, interesting propositions. But friends, this idea is not that popular. That life 3.0 or fourth industrial revolution or second machine age is not that popular academically, but a very interesting proposition about our technological age has been given by Gandhi. Friends, one of the best way to understand our technological future is certainly Mahatma Gandhi. He had certain interesting propositions. Maybe you are not in a position to agree with Gandhi. You may dispute many of his assumptions. But Gandhi is a very interesting starting point to understand our situation now. Gandhi wrote Hindu Swaraj, Indian Home Rule, or Satyagraha in South Africa, or the story of my experiments with the truth. These are his original books. Gandhi's socio-political worldview can be found in his book Hindu Swaraj. You should read that book. I think that is available for free download on Google. It's a very small book, about which the Sanghparivar writer, what was his name, who wrote Hindutva? Forgot his name. What was his name? That person who wrote Hindutva? Savarkar. Savarkar. Savarkar said, Gandhi's book is not at all a book because that's a very small book that cannot be considered as a book. But friends, Gandhi's worldview is very interesting in this book, Hindu Swaraj. In Hindu Swaraj, there is a first Gandhi and a second Gandhi. First Gandhi is very easy to understand, but second Gandhi is very complicated to understand because second Gandhi is a metaphysical Gandhi. On the first reading, you will see, oh, Gandhi is so much a simple writer. But there is another layer to Gandhi. That Gandhi is very complicated. A metaphysical Gandhi. In the chapter on machinery, you can refer to that book. There's a chapter on machinery in which Gandhi criticizes modern civilization, modern technology, everything. In the chapter on machinery, one can find, keep in mind, Gandhi has written it in a dialogue format, just like Plato wrote about, all his books in dialogue format, in which Socrates was talking to his students. Just like that, Gandhi has written this book, Hindu Swaraj, in a way in which an editor is talking to a reader. That is the way in which Gandhi has written Hindu Swaraj. There is an editor in the book. That editor of the book is talking to his own reader. And in machinery, the chapter in Hindu Swaraj, editor, that is Gandhi, replying to a reader, that we readers. Editor is Gandhi, the writer or the author. Editor is replying to the reader, that we readers, that it is machinery that has impoverished India. It is the machinery that impoverished India. That is, machinery has destroyed India. Technology has destroyed India. So once reading, we will feel the impression that Gandhi was a passionate opponent of modern technology and modern civilization, modern industries. And we will feel that, oh, this Gandhi, this person has preferred pencil to typewriter, or loincloth to business suit, or plough field to the factory. And he walked barefoot instead of bullock cart or modern automobiles. We will feel like that. But friends, Gandhi was certainly against machines. But there is a higher layer to his critique of machines. This can be put in this way, that Gandhi was against the dehumanizing effect of machinery. Because Gandhi believed all machines are good, but the problem is that all the machines will have a dehumanizing effect, that machines will destroy the essence of man. For example, in one of the areas of the chapter machinery, a reader asked to the editor the Gandhi. The question is like this. The reader asked, do you hate machines? Then the editor Gandhi answered, no. While my body on itself is nothing but a meticulous machinery, how can I dismiss it? The editor replied, my spinning wheel or even the toothpick, for that matter, is a machine. Gandhi agreed. I hate not the machines, but this growing passion for machines. Friends, that is the problem. We have developed a growing passion for machines. Imagine, how many hours are you spending on your WhatsApp? How many hours are you spending on Facebook? How many hours are you giving to your mobile device for purposes which has nothing to do with your cognitive abilities or anything at all? Which Gandhi criticized. So Gandhi was opposed to certain specific signifiers of modern technology. And of course, Gandhi was against the profession of doctors. Gandhi never agreed with the modern medical science. Gandhi discredited modern medical science. Modern medical science is false. Modern lawyers are fake. The profession of lawyers is not, good one. Modern political structure is not good. Modern state or modern parliament is not good. And he had a concrete reason for rejecting modern civilization and modern technological civilization. Friends, you just consider a scenario. Train. Of course, it's an inevitable mode of transportation of the modern times. Train connects landscape and people. But what it is used for today, friends, that is very important. Gandhi asked that question. What it is used for today? You build a house in Tamil Nadu for which you collect marble from Rajasthan. The labor and money you put into this act is utterly meaningless. Why are you not building a house by using resources from Tamil Nadu itself? Why are you not building a house in Kerala itself by using resources available in your own premises? Instead, you invented technology called train, by which you have used a resource located far away, Rajasthan, where you got marble and you collected that marble to Tamil Nadu or Kerala and you built a house. Aren't you exploiting nature? And all this happened. Why? Because you have train. So why you have created train? Just to exploit nature. Just to exploit nature. You created train to exploit nature. So technology is a road to depletion of nature. Technology is a road to depletion of nature. So your massive passenger transportation projects such as aviation, such as metro train, such as express corridors. Friends, these will deprive your true essence, your true soul. In the days to come, you will be soulless, according to Gandhi, because you will act very mechanically. There will be no more the person you are. You will not have soul. You will be just a machine, and all the humans will act mechanically. Gandhi believed that tools are very important. Friends, Gandhi believed tools are very important. We need tools. But the use of tools at the industrial scale is against our humanity. The use of tools at the industrial scale is against our humanity, is against our essence, which Gandhi criticized. And Gandhi firmly believed that modern civilization is going to perish and modern technology is going to kill us. Gandhi predicted in the Hindu Swaraj, particularly in the chapter called Machinery. Bigger technological infrastructure rob or erodes the very essence of man, Gandhi believed. And if you are interested, please read Gandhi's book Hindu Swaraj, and particularly the chapter on machinery. Friends, there's another way of looking at technology other than Gandhi or Daniel Bell or other writers I have told you. It is the German writer Martin Heidegger. He was a 20th century German philosopher. He had contributed enormously on phenomenology, hermeneutics, existentialism. But that is not part of our discussion. We are going to understand what Heidegger talked about technology. For that, friends, you may read a book he has written. The book was titled The Question Concerning Technology, which I have downloaded for this lecture, and I have referred some of the points from that book. It is available for free download on internet, but it's a tough book. It's not like Gandhi. Gandhi is also not that easy to read. As I told you, there's a two Gandhi, a simple Gandhi and a metaphysical Gandhi. But this writer is so complicated. Heidegger has published this book in 1954. This was not a book, it was a lecture he has delivered in a German university. And the lecture was titled, lecture series, a series of lecture. It was titled The Question Concerning Technology. That was, he talked this idea to his students, undergraduate students. And later that lectures he published as a book. That was titled The Question Concerning Technology. And Heidegger observes, it's a very interesting proposition. I'm not sure whether I'm able to convince you what he said, but I will try. He was saying that Heidegger observes, because of technology, all distance in time, be curious, all distance in time and space are shrinking. His phrase, all distance in time and space are shrinking. So imagine, all distance in time and space are shrinking, yet the hasty setting aside of all distance brings no nearness. For nearness does not consist in a small amount of distance. It's very complicated. I will repeat once more. All distances in time and space are shrinking. Yet the hasty setting aside of all distances brings no nearness. For nearness does not consist in a small amount of distance. It's a very complicated phrase. His point is that, friends, our current conception of technology can be called as instrumental and anthropological definition of technology. That is it. That he was preoccupied with, our instrumental approach to technology or anthropological approach to technology. That is the human scale use of technology. That we use technology just for our benefit. That means technology is not an end. We are not using technology as an end of life. Rather, we are using technology as a means to our life. It is a mean, not an end. That is why he said, man is using technology as an instrument towards achieving something. So, creating technology is not the end of life. Rather, creating technology is a means to life. So we have something more greater, purpose. But he was saying, in our life, everything depends on how we manipulate technology. How we manipulate technology. For example, he referred to Rhine River, just like Gandhi referred to a train. He referred to Rhine River, one of the major rivers in Europe. He says, a Rhine River is supplying hydraulic pressure because you have built dams there. On rivers, you have tamed the river and you built a big dam there and created hydraulic pressure. And the river was not meant to create hydraulic pressure because it naturally flows towards the sea. That was the purpose for which nature created a river. But what man did the fact that he created a big dam and prevented the natural flow of the river Rhine. Then what you have used? You invented turbines. And turbines are turning because of hydraulic pressure. And the turning of turbine, the machine in motion, you created electricity going. And to transport electricity, you have invented cables and network wires, whereby you dispatch electricity from Rhine River to other parts of the Europe. For this to happen, a long distance power station is built and a long network cables are being set up. So in this interlocking process, even the Rhine River itself appears at our command. Rhine River was created by nature to naturally flow into the sea. It's a cyclical process. The river goes to sea, and due to some environmental process, it again fall into the Rhine River as rain drops. This process continues. But what you have done by technology, you have prevented the flow of the river. And Rhine River feels that it has no its own command. But Rhine River falls under the command of man. So what happens? The Rhine River is now namely a water power supplier. A water power supplier, which has no other essence. It has just become what you may call power supplying river. The meaning of river is lost. And what is the problem here? Technology destroyed the very essence of nature. Whether the river was created by nature to act as a power supplying water flow, not at all. That was not the purpose for which nature created Rhine River. But man has intervened in the nature and destroyed the flow of the river and converted that river into a power supplying water flow. So Heidegger says, technology reveals things to us as standing reserve. That a word he used, a phrase he used. Technology reveals to man as a standing reserve. That is meaning everything imposed upon or challenged for application as a for application or as a resource for application. Everything is revealed to us remains challenged. So Rhine River is challenged because it is revealed to us. It is revealed to us. It has an essence, but that essence is lost because river is revealed to us. Look at the way in which modern transportation, road construction destroy mountains. You're taking mud from one place to another place. You're taking rocks from one place to another place, in which you destroy the very nature of mountains for construction of roads, destroy the very nature of rivers, destroy the very nature of water flows. So everything revealed to us from nature remains challenged because we consider everything revealed to us as a resource. For example, he referred to another example, just like Gandhi referred to train. We challenge land because land is revealed to us. We 12,000 years ago, we have realized that we can use land for cultivation. And later, in the 19th century, we are exposed to the fact that there is coal energy in the land. So we started to mine. We started to dig up the land and find out, fuel or energy sources. So once land is revealed to us, we started digging it for coal. We are treating the land as nothing but a coal reserve. That's the problem, friends. When land is revealed to us, it is no more a land. It is a coal reserve. Coal is then stored. Whenever we want, we go back to land, treating the land as a coal reserve. The coal then is challenged forth for heat. The coal itself is not coal. When coal is revealed to us, we will heat it for energy, so that it is able to deliver steam. So Watt's engine were invented. So Watt's engine were basically steam engine. So land revealed to us, coal revealed to us. Then coal is not simply no more a coal because we heat the coal, thereby steam is delivered. Then steam power wheels, then wheels power factories. Then factories themselves are challenged because we know that when you create factories, you can convert it again into products. Then products are not simply products because products are revealed to us. because we created machines. So this way, friends, everything that is revealed to us are again manipulated. This way, he was saying that technology destroyed man of his essence. Technology destroyed man of his essence. Friends, another very interesting way at which you can look at technology is Manuel Castells. Manuel Castells. He is a very famous writer, a Spanish sociologist. He has written almost 23 books. But a very interesting book for this discussion is his Information Age trilogy. Information Age trilogy. He has written a trilogy series. Trilogy means 3 books. First one is The Rise of Network Society. The Rise of Network Society. Second book is The Power of Identity. The Power of Identity. Third book is The End of Millennium. The End of Millennium. These are 3 books he has written in a trilogy series. And the last book was The Network Society. The Rise of Network Society. Friends, he used the vocabulary network society to refer our present condition, human condition. That he was saying that we are living in a network society. What is network society? Network society is a social structure. Network society is a social structure resulting from the interaction between new technological paradigms. It is resulting from the interaction between new technological paradigms. Network provides us new capabilities. Network provides us new capabilities. It is different from old type of social world. Our current world is a network world. In the old world, resources were monopolized by state or church or other institutions. Network remained only a private domain. But in the modern world, network of the private world were coming out of the private domain and started mixing with the public domain. Digital technologies are, for example, digital network enabled overcome our many limits. For example, I can tell you one example. You take the case of patriarchal families. In patriarchal families, women are supposed to remain at kitchen. They don't have a public space. But what happened to such families in digital network? Such women who are confined only to the kitchen are now able to connect with the wider world because they have Facebook or YouTube or WhatsApp. So they are able to connect with the people, to express themselves, to power their identity in a way that can destroy the old limits imposed by patriarchy itself. But he was saying that the diffusion of technology has self-destructive effect. The diffusion of technology has self-destructive effect. Look at the global warming effect, or look at the pandemic that we are seeing. This is all because of technology. That's why he was saying that technology has self-destructive effect. So network society is not that superior stage of human development. He never believes that network society is not so much a superior stage in human evolution. Just you say industrial revolution was a superior stage in human civilization, or technological revolution in Germany was a superior stage in human evolution, or network society was a superior stage in human evolution. Not at all. Rather, the diffusion of, you saying that you are giving more computers to schools and it will, it will bring about a revolution in learning. Not at all, friends. It is not the true scenario. These are all wrong assumptions. Friends, use of technology, the good use of technology depends upon where it is used, by whom it is used, for whom it is used, and for what it is used, and how it is used. These are very important. How it is used, where it is used, by whom it is used, for whom it is used, for what it is used. These are very important when you use technology. Simply giving laptop to school children doesn't bring any kind of changes in society. They will become just slaves, the dumb generation. So, technology has self-destructive potential. That is what Manuel Castells predicted in his, idea of network society. Friends, shall I wind up the lecture? Is that okay? Because I don't have time to talk about other issues, like what Marx said or what liberals talk about. Marx was also very, very positive about technology, but he was afraid of the fact that when technology goes into the hands of bourgeoisies, the essence of man will be lost. He was very appreciative of technology. Marx was very appreciative of technology because Marx believed that when technology is invented, it will help labor power to come out of oppression. But the point was that when technology goes to the hand of bourgeoisies, that will be used against man. That's why Marx was afraid of technology. Marx was also afraid of technology because it will go into the hands of bourgeoisies. That is what Marx said, and you can find that idea in Capital, his book Capital, chapter 15. Chapter 15 of Capital, he talks about technology. 15. It is a 150-page chapter. It's just like a book. So chapter 15 of Capital talks about machinery and a large-scale industry. That is the title of that chapter. Friends, the lecture is ended. You can have a discussion.